All right, we are delighted to welcome to Spark Nick Gaffney. Nick is a documentary photographer who has exhibited nationally and internationally. He oversees all education at AVA Gallery in Lebanon, where he also teaches photography. And you can see some of his incredible photographs at ngaffney.net. And of course, you can always visit avagallery.org to learn about the educational programs there. Nick was born and raised in upstate New York and lived in New York City. He received his MFA from Pratt Institute in Brooklyn and his BA from NYU. He has taught photography, the history of photography, studio art, design, and digital media in higher education for over 15 years. So he's one of AVA Gallery's artists in residence, as well as being a teaching artist. He lives in Lebanon, New Hampshire with his wife and his 2 daughters, and of course his dog, Ruby. And something you might not know about Nick, he is an avid hiker. He's a 46er, and the love of outdoors certainly enters into his photography. We're going to talk a bit about that, as well as the fact that he is interested in disruptions to the natural landscape and finding the unexpected, discarded jeans lying intertwined with garbage, the way a raven's wingspan seems to echo in the crossed bars of a composition. So he likes to look around and observe and see what is to be seen. Welcome to Spark, Nick. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I'm going to jump right in and ask you, what first drew you to photography? How were you hooked to that art form?
When I was a undergraduate in college at NYU, as you said, I was an English major. I probably wasn't the best English major. NYU is a pretty big school, and I was able to, in addition to taking English classes, try a bunch of other things. In my junior year, I took a photography class, and I really liked it. My teacher, a woman named Adita Messina, took us to an exhibition of another photographer named Roy Dekarava, who was having a big retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art. That happened to happen the semester I was taking the class, and I adored his photographs. They're really great. Roy Dekarava, if you want to look him up, he passed away a few years ago. But he, not only did I like the fact that he was kind of someone who was like a street photographer who mostly photographed in New York City and Harlem, and I liked his subject matter, but I liked the fact that each one of his photographs, you knew they were his. He had a style. He had a kind of a perspective and a way of looking at things. Not necessarily what my perspective is, but it made me realize that you could be an artist with photographs, and you could have a certain perspective and point of view, and you could share that point of view with the world. And since then, I've kind of been trying and kind of searching for my own perspective, but that's kind of where it all started, I guess.
That's fantastic. And I think that really feeds into what I've read about you and heard about you and see in your photographs, that you really try to focus on finding art all around you. And I just wonder if you could talk about that process a little bit.
Sure. I think when I was a younger photographer, I used to kind of go out into the world and actually kind of find situations and sort of actually set things up kind of within the natural landscape. I think I was maybe a little less secure about my ability to find interesting things on my own. And then as I grew and matured as an artist and a photographer, I kind of went out into the world and started looking for things to photograph. And that's kind of where I am. Kind of very often I will find a particular place that I want to discover and kind of explore a little bit more. A few years ago, I spent in West Lebanon, New Hampshire. There is there was a Kmart. Kmart just closed down, actually, but there's sort of a disused nature preserve behind there, and I spent almost a year going back to this one particular nature preserve to photograph. And there's unfortunately, a homeless population that exists back there. Well, unfortunately or unfortunately, it's there, and so one of the things I was doing was sort of documenting what was left behind by that population as well. More recently, I spent the last 4 years going to the last Sunday morning of the Tunbridge World's Fair to photograph kind of what the fair looks like on the last Sunday morning. I wasn't quite sure what I was doing with the photographs, but I started in 2017 and I kept going. This year, or in 2020, there was no fair because of the pandemic, but I still went and photographed there, and I'm working on turning those photographs into a larger series that I think says something about kind of the space, but also something about the idea of loss and the fact that, you're going to photograph at a place for a particular reason, but that reason doesn't exist anymore, but you're still trying to make images from that space.
Wow. Wow. That sounds amazing. Tunbridge Fair is so incredible too. And that emptiness and sort of capturing that emptiness. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say it helps that it's in such a beautiful little area, kind of in the middle of Vermont. It's a great place to make images to begin with, but especially kind of early on a Sunday morning, I think.
Right. Yes, it is. That is a beautiful area. Yeah, and then so that sort of gets to your philosophy on teaching. I think it might, that idea of experimentation and being willing. You talked a little bit about being willing to fail and willing to try lots of things. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, and especially with young photographers or people like me that I wouldn't consider myself a photographer, but I do have a cell phone. I do take pictures. So just a little bit about that philosophy that you have.
I was, as a teacher, one of the things I really love to do, and I try to do, partially because it's sort of how I learned to be a photographer myself, is I like to show my students other photographs from the history of photography and kind of go in there and kind of, if I see something that they're photographing or kind of a subject of the photograph, and I say, oh, well, you should look at this person, not because they did it better than you necessarily, but you should sort of like see kind of what was done before you. I think it's really important to kind of understand of what came before you, to understand the tradition of the medium. I think a lot of photographers, especially young photographers, get really hung up on the technical aspects of photography. And it's not like those are unimportant things. You need to know how to use the tools that you're working with. Any artist should. But I think it's easy to get swallowed up by that and saying, oh, I'm going to take just the perfect image based, it's going to be as sharp as it can. I'm going to get a really, really great camera with a zillion megapixels and kind of do that. And they don't think so much about what they're actually photographing. And I think younger photographers, should photograph lots of things to kind of figure out what it is they're interested in. I think the best photographers, no matter who you are curious people. They may be introverts or extroverts, but they're curious people. They're interested in, especially documentary photographers, what the world looks like and how they are sort of interacting with the world, but B, sort of describing the world with their camera and kind of what new things can they do that. So I try to give students assignments that hopefully give them the opportunity to go out and interact and describe the world in different ways.
Yes. So what would you say to viewers who, like me, aren't necessarily photographers, but want to sort of start to gather that mindset of looking at the world and finding perspective? How would you suggest that people start going about thinking that way or looking around the world differently?
It's a good question. I think the idea of being curious is really important, whether or not you're actually photographing. I think just kind of wondering about things and not letting things go, not being afraid of curiosity. Because I think everyone is sort of naturally curious, but then we sort of let things go. And I'm thinking about, the other day I saw something random on the side of the road, and I wasn't planning on going out to photograph, but I happened to have my camera with me. So I stopped, and I deliberately stopped, and I was going to be 10 minutes late for whatever I was doing, but I really wanted to make a picture of whatever it was I was photographing. I don't know if it was a good photograph or not, but it was something that kind of intrigued me. So I made the time to stop and get out of my car and walk over to where I was going to make the image and see if I can do something with what I was photographing. I think it was in Vermont somewhere, but I think the idea of kind of slowing down and not being afraid to stop and question something and be a little bit curious about it is really important, whether or not you're a photographer.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the things that it can do too is take you outside of your own head, right? Outside of your own thoughts, and to look at the world and actually look at what's right in front of you instead of thinking about
everyone is so kind of caught up on their phones and everything, and I'm as guilty of that as anyone. But I think it's important to be able to slow down and look. One of the things I do with young photographers is actually give them a little bit of a breathing exercise. It's strange, but if you're taking a picture with a camera with a slow shutter speed, being able to slow your body down a little bit maybe can reduce the idea of camera shake. But I think it's an important thing to understand whenever you're sort of stopping to photograph. It's breathing slows you down a little bit.
Oh, I love that. I love that idea too of just breathing and taking a moment to take things in. I wonder, would
Yeah.
you mind doing that little exercise with me so that we can,
Well,
so that you can
sure. I should say that I'm not a trained, meditation expert by any sense. This is just my own thing. And I think other people have done this, but just sort of the point where your body is the most still is when you breathe in and you're holding the breath, but that's not where it is. And then you let your breath out. And then it's that moment before you take another breath in. That's kind of when your body is the stillest, because you're not really holding a breath where your body's a little bit tense. You're not releasing a breath. You're just there right before the next breath comes in. And I think that's kind of where for me at least, that's where I tend to be the most still. And I think it's an important thing to think about. I think when you're making pictures and all lots of other parts of life as well.
Yeah, yeah, and also that moment before inspiration, right? Before you bring
Sure.
breath in.
Yeah.
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 That's
And
fantastic.
kind of slowing yourself down a little bit as well. I think makes a big difference. Yeah.
Oh man, Nick, this is fantastic. Can you just tell me when you teach classes at AVA and
I do. I don't know when I'm going to be teaching next because I'm also the education manager at AVA. So kind of I wear the hat of the teacher, the hat of the manager, and the hat of an artist photographer. So currently I've been really concentrating on the artist photographer and management things. I'm hoping to teach this summer, but I don't know precisely when, but that would my hope is to teach there as well. And I'm also on the board of the Vermont Center for Photography and trying to connect, which is down in Brattleboro, Vermont, and I'm trying to we're trying to kind of add more classes and kind of and have kind of teaching happen down there as well, about an hour south of where I live. But
excellent. So we'll make sure everybody makes sure to check out AVA's website and keep an eye on when you can take a class from Nick, but also your website I imagine would have
and Gaffney.net. Yeah, we'll have everything there as well. So.
Oh man, thank you so much for joining us today. Again, I feel like I could talk to you for hours and I can't wait to take one of your classes.
Sure. Well, I'd love it if you were there. So thanks so much. Yeah.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So everybody, you have been watching Spark, the Upper Valley's new arts and culture program here on CATV. Don't forget to subscribe to CATV's YouTube channel, and you can learn more about Nick and every guest that we have by visiting their websites listed in the episode descriptions. Thank you for watching Spark.